Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. In 2025, Jews around the world could not detach what was happening in their own communities to unfolding events in Israel and the Middle East. The war in Gaza had an undeniable impact on Jewish life everywhere. It affected national and local politics, triggered a surge in antisemitism, and most horrifically, inspired deadly attacks against Jews who were doing nothing more than living their lives as Jews, worshiping in synagogue or celebrating their holidays. On the Haaretz Podcast, alongside our coverage of what was happening in Israel and the region, we closely followed how it was affecting the diaspora. We listened to the voices of rabbis, Jewish leaders, and members of communities as they navigated this difficult year. We also checked in with Haaretz journalists who are covering these stories. Our look at the Jewish world in 2025 through the lens of the Haaretz Podcast is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Over the course of the Gaza war, a strong and persistent protest movement took root and grew in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets week after week, demanding that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government prioritize the lives of the hostages in the hands of Hamas and pursue a ceasefire agreement more aggressively. They also expressed concern over the humanitarian crisis of the Palestinians in Gaza. For liberal Zionist Jews in the diaspora, that situation presented a dilemma. Speaking out in the same way their Israeli counterparts were meant facing a backlash in their own communities, accusations that their criticism was offering moral support to anti-Semites, to those who would eliminate Israel and those who pose danger to their own people. On the podcast, French Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur shared the choices that she made and the consequences she faced.
I was in Israel in May, and I spoke then with many hostages' families who convinced me I had to talk, that I couldn't be silent anymore. At the time, there were members of the Israeli government who said that hunger was a legitimate tool of war, that there were no innocent people in Gaza, and that bringing back the hostages was not the absolute priority. And after hearing these sentences, I felt, as a Jewish leader, as a rabbi, that I had to talk. And I talked through the prism of Jewish tradition. You know, I used the text, what I always do as a rabbi. And I used this quote that is very known, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your neighbor, your fellow Jews as yourself. And I just said that it's interesting that the quote before, the pasuk before, the verse that comes immediately before this famous one says, Ocheach tocheach et amitecha, you should be able to rebuke your neighbor and then you will love him or her as yourself. Like, love in Judaism and in Jewish tradition is not unconditional. You have first to be able to announce criticism because of your love, because when you care about someone and you love someone, you have to be able to talk. And this is why I decided to speak, to talk. And I didn't expect, I was used to get attacked in France, especially from the extreme left, from pro-Palestinian crowds, anti-Zionist, for me being a Jew, actually, a Jewish leader. but I didn't expect that it would come so strongly from part of the Jewish community. And what struck me is that I got actually 3 kinds of criticism for what I said. The first type of criticism were people who told me, what you say is wrong. What you say never happened. You're lying. So a category of people that stand in a state of denial, which I totally understand, because denial is a very natural human reflex. You want to protect yourself, so you pretend it doesn't exist. So I could understand people who attacked me saying, no, what you say is wrong, it never happened. Then part of the people who attacked me, a second category, told me, well, actually what you say is happening, but you shouldn't say it because, you shouldn't expose any dibat haaretz, as we say in Hebrew. You shouldn't expose anything that gives weapons to our enemy. You should wash, it's the famous sentence, you should wash your dirty laundry in the family in private, which is nonsense. Right now people have access to what is happening. Actually, I believe precisely the opposite. I believe that the health of a society and of a group, including of the Jewish community, depends on our ability to disagree and to expose our disagreement in a very healthy way. But then there was a third category of people who told me, you know what, maybe what you say, it's not that it's not happening, it's not that you shouldn't expose it, but it's okay that we behave like that. To be totally honest, I got much more support, including from Jews in France, than I got attacks. But the attacks were really, really harsh, including death threats and hate mails. And also another thing that struck me in this period is that many, many people, and until today it happens in Paris, I walk in the street and people stop me, Jews stop me, and they say, thank you for talking, because we exactly believe what you said, but we cannot say it anymore.
For Jewish progressives in the diaspora, already highly critical of Israel, the Gaza war pushed them even further. In March, I interviewed controversial journalist and author Peter Beinart after he published his book titled Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. He talked about his evolving view of the Jewish state and his shock at the Israeli and Jewish reaction to President Donald Trump's Gaza Riviera vision when the U.S. president unveiled it in February.
I had this fear before October 7th and before the assault on Gaza that there really were no red lines, that because Israel largely had impunity because of its protection from the United States, and because in the American Jewish community, essentially there was a system by which Israel would act, and then American Jewish institutions would create a kind of post facto rationalization for whatever Israel did. There was no force, either in our community or in the U.S. government or the international system, that could say this and no further. This crosses a red line. And I was actually wrote in 2023 about my concerns about the possibility of ethnic cleansing on a large scale, as opposed to the small scale ethnic cleansing that has been going on for years, large scale ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. But I could not imagine what we've seen in Gaza, right? Which is basically the destruction of an entire society, most of the buildings destroyed, most of the hospitals, most of the schools, most of the universities, most of the agriculture, the necessities of life destroyed. And now this widespread embrace of mass expulsion, not just by people on the Israeli and, for that matter, American Jewish right, but people in the center, people who were considered moderate, centrist, people who were considered reasonable, thoughtful people. That's the catastrophe, the horror, I would even say the evil that I could not imagine.
Criticism and soul-searching when it came to Israel and its policies in the war was not limited to the left. Rabbi Yosef Blau, an 86-year-old American Orthodox mainstream rabbi, sparked strong reaction when he spearheaded an open letter signed by 80 Orthodox rabbis calling on Israel to assume, quote, its share of the responsibility for Palestinian civilians in Gaza and condemned settler violence in the West Bank. Rabbi Blau joined the podcast to talk about the petition and the backlash.
Let's separate the two issues that the petition focused on. One of them is the growth in Jewish violence in the West Bank. This particular issue has concerned me for years because it's part of a broader concern that I have about the shift in the world of religious Zionism, which is the world that I grew up in and have identified with essentially my entire adult life, from being the most moderate force in the Israeli government and incorporating within it a large variety of views on pretty much every issue outside of religion in the state, to become more and more associated with the extreme right. And I've written about this, and I've been very concerned about it. So this was there all along. What was new to me was the willingness within the community that I was part of to literally deny the problem of famine in Gaza.
In the time since the petition was published, what has been the response to it that has reached you personally?
I've received numerous personal comments from people that I've seen on the street and at different occasions, and emails, of course, ranging from the most positive possible, inspiring, etc., to calling me a traitor. And a number of them saying that I am going to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of Israeli Jews, which I find extremely difficult to not only to accept, to understand. I have no illusion that the letter or articles will change the Israeli governmental policy. And it's certainly not going to influence Hamas's policy. I openly state that Hamas is primarily responsible for the famine, as well as responsible for the killing and the terroristic attacks. I don't get it.
The most painful and frightening moments for diaspora Jews over the past year came following the multiple deadly terrorist attacks triggered by antisemitism and Islamic ideology, supercharged by the atmosphere around the war. In May, the violence came to Washington, D.C., when 2 young employees of the Israeli embassy were shot to death outside an American Jewish Committee event. Former Congressman Ted Deutsch, who heads the AJC, was still in shock when he spoke on the podcast. Here he is describing the reaction of his former fellow politicians to the tragedy.
I appreciate a phone call, and we appreciate kind notes. The response has to be much more public and much more sustained. And what we're really fighting against right now, is that what happened on Wednesday doesn't just become a blip. And that we actually use it as a turning point. It's really hard. I mean, in our attention span is so short right now. And when it comes to issues like this, especially when social media is constantly churning and looking for more ways to get people upset, moving on to the next issue, and politics is front and center always in the United States and Israel. When all of that's happening, taking a moment here and using this to really stand up and say, Jews should not feel afraid to gather together in a synagogue or in a community center or anywhere just because of who they are. And it's crazy that we've accepted as normal checkpoints and armed guards and metal detectors and tactical SWAT teams standing outside of synagogues on Shabbat because of concerns. And that's what we need to hear from our leaders. And have we heard enough of it? No. And with the funerals happening and Sarah's funeral happening this week, there is another opportunity for us to hear more of this. But from our at AJC and in the Jewish world, I think this is what we need to demand. The response is better, frankly, in the U.S. than it was after October 7th. But now it's what do we do to build upon it, make it more public, make it more powerful, and again reinforce that this just can't be normal.
Sadly, the shootings in Washington were just a sign of things to come. In October, 2 worshippers at a synagogue in Manchester, England, were killed in an attack on Yom Kippur. And then, at year's close, came the shocking massacre on Bondi Beach in Australia at a Hanukkah celebration that killed 15 people, marking the worst terror attack in Australia's history. Community leader Lynda Ben Menashe joined the podcast shortly after the event to describe the grief and the deep sense of anger among Australian Jews who, she said, knew that the writing was on the wall.
24 hours now, and most Jewish Australians have gone through a gamut of emotions: numbness, absolute shock but not surprise, despair, devastation, and just a feeling of inevitability, which is a terrible thing to say, but we, had watched Jews gunned down on the streets of Washington D.C. and London and Paris and other cities, and we knew that it was just a matter of time until it happened in Australia, and it's just horrific. And we, I guess, feel very different tonight than we did last night. Tonight, some of us can kind of walk without shaking, but last night we were all very, very, very shaky. And I will say that there's an awful lot of anger too.
Tell me about the anger.
Well, the anger comes when we have experienced a period of over 2 years since October 7, where we saw my city, Sydney, desecrated 3 times, actually. So there was the unbelievable impact of October 7. And 2 days later, on the steps of our Sydney Opera House, our beloved building, Israeli flags were burned and people were screaming death to the Jews and where are the Jews and maybe gas the Jews. And we Jews were told that we had to stay home because it was too dangerous for us. And all of this was in reaction to the state government projecting onto the sails of our beautiful opera house the colours of blue and white in solidarity with Jewish people everywhere after the October 7 attack. And it was a horrific experience for us to witness, but also the fact that there was absolutely no consequence to this behaviour in our city. That was an absolute turning point for us in our feeling of safety as Australians. And then this year in August, you probably saw there was a march over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, yet another Australian icon. And it was named a March for Humanity, but what it really was a march against Israel and against Zionism. And there were flags of various terrorist organisations, including ISIS, and there was a massive portrait right at the front of the march under which a whole lot of politicians and important people stood, of the Ayatollah, that great bastion of human rights. And again, there was sort of no there was no retribution, there was no consequence to this. And now we see the exact result of the foment of this hatred and of the lack of consequences. We see this exact result play out that we have begged our governments to prevent. You know, we kept saying, with our history, with our understanding of where hate speech leads, where our understanding of the vilification of a community, the demonization of a people leads, please use the laws that we have in place to stop the hate speech on our streets and this vilification. And it wasn't done, and we knew it would lead here, and it did. And so the anger is palpable.
Throughout the hostage crisis, there was one Israeli family who spoke to the hearts of world Jewry in a special way. John Poland and Rachel Goldberg Poland, American immigrants to Jerusalem, advocated for their son Hirsch's release until they learned the tragic news of his murder by Hamas terrorists in an underground tunnel in August of 2024. But even after that, the couple continued to campaign tirelessly for the release of the remaining hostages. John Poland had a powerful message for Jews everywhere when it came time this year for Passover. In the week before Passover, we Israelis are used to saying to each other, Chag Sameach, happy holiday. But this one is far from happy for anyone in the country, I'm sure especially for you and your family this year. Is there a way that you and Rachel are trying to make Passover meaningful in such a terrible time of tragedy and heartbreak?
There is, and thank you for that sensitive question. You know, every Shabbat, every Chag, every holiday is challenging for us. It's just such a reminder to us of what's missing in our lives, the loss of Hirsch. It's even more true as we come to Passover. So we had a hard time last month with Purim. Like I said, every holiday is hard, but the holiday that celebrates going from bondage to freedom, the holiday that celebrates our redemption, just feels wrong now. And Rachel and I have talked a lot about it as we get close to Passover and to Seder night. And what we have said is we hate to be the Debbie Downers, but actually our Passover this year, we expect to be really difficult and really sad and really challenging. And we think that's what it should be for Jewish people everywhere in the world, which is to say, let's not try to hide the fact that 59 of our brothers and sisters are still in captivity. Let's make it a core, sad, challenging theme of our holidays and of our Seders. We've talked about symbolic things that people should do. Maybe put a lemon on your table, a lemon because it's yellow, the color of the hostage struggle, because it's bitter, to reflect the bitterness that the hostages and their families and all the Jewish people are going through. Maybe this year, instead of just dipping our greens in the salt water, let's drink some salt water, because we know from testimonies of recently released hostages, that is what's happening. Tal Shoham spoke of drinking salt water because that's all there was. The point is, let's lean into the pain this year, and let's not even try to sugarcoat it for our kids. Those of us who have little kids at the table, normally we try to entertain them. Let's talk to them. Let's make them never forget the Seder of 2025 that was so painful.
The largest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel lives in New York City. And in the summer, the winner of the Democratic Party primary for the mayor of New York City turned out to be a young, charismatic Muslim progressive with a record of support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, who said that he did not support Israel as a Jewish state. This set off alarm bells for many New York Jews. And the bells continued ringing throughout the campaign for the general election, in which Zohran Mamdani emerged triumphant. In August, I spoke with Rabbi Rachel Timoner, leader of Brooklyn's Beit Elohim synagogue. She talked with me about how she was handling the impact of the Mamdani candidacy as she led a congregation that included both his supporters and his detractors.
I do have a congregation with a big range of views, and I definitely see the pressures of this time affecting my community, and the threat of division in our congregation is always there. Gratefully, we held listening circles just for our members in this last year, and 50 people per session listening to each other's perspectives, trying to reinforce the idea that we can disagree and still be a community. And that was incredibly helpful. And we've been doing other things to try to keep us listening to each other and keep the value of community to be above the threat of division. Will Mamdani be good for the Jewish community? Look, we disagree about some very important things related to Israel. And also, New York City doesn't have a foreign policy. It's a city. And what I have seen is that he is aware of the criticism and concern in the Jewish community, listening very closely, and willing to move a little bit in response to those concerns. He has shifted he's shifted twice what he's saying about the phrase globalize the Intifada. He has heard us, that it represents to us the idea that what happened in the Second Intifada, the bombing of innocent people on a regular basis, that globalizing that is a message saying it is good to kill Jews wherever they live. We have communicated that to him, and he has heard it and understood, and then taught it, spoken about it several times, and changed his message. That, might seem like a small matter, but it is significant in that he is wanting to be in a relationship, and he is wanting to understand, and he doesn't agree with us. I'm a Zionist, and many of my members are, and many Jews in New York are, and he's not going to suddenly become a Zionist. Is he aware that he needs to care for and attend to the Jews and the Zionists who live in New York? I believe he is aware of that. I think his perspectives on Israel, while they are upsetting to many of us, are perhaps not the most salient question in terms of who should run New York City.
It's interesting to note that after that conversation, Timoner hosted Mamdani in her synagogue and, after his successful election, became one of the 5 New York rabbis who joined his transition committee ahead of his swearing in on January 1st. The New York race might have been local, but what was happening in Israel mainly affected politics on a national and international scale. While the tanking of support for the Jewish state in the Democratic Party was old news, 2025 was the year that Israel's true believers in the Republican and conservative camp began to show signs of alienation as well. Haaretz Washington correspondent Ben Samuels and cyber correspondent Omer Ben Jacob joined the podcast to talk about how this was happening even among Trump's closest supporters and among evangelicals, despite the Netanyahu government's efforts to keep their friends close.
There is a very real tug of war happening right now, both in terms of power structures and generational divides in different camps within the party. I think there's a very real and acute understanding that, while Donald Trump was very successful in his reascendance to the top of the political echelon right now, there is very much an open question about what happens next, both in terms of the 2026 midterms and also who Trump's torchbearer is going to be in the 2028 presidential election. And there's no doubt that the conversations around Israel and accordingly the conversations surrounding anti-Semitism are playing a major role in informing these conversations. So with the generational divide, it very much mirrors what happened with the Democratic Party over the past few years, where, there has been a sort of, increased fluency and understanding that, just these unshakable, unbreakable bonds between U.S. and Israel should go unquestioned. And What you're seeing on different fringes of the party, however, is rather than, just saying, I'm going to support Israel because that is the will of God or whatever, evangelical talking points have emerged, you're seeing a lot of right-wing Republicans who are critical of Israel using their own Christianity to criticize the state of Israel and to criticize the treatment of Palestinian Christians. But on the other hand, you have another camp of evangelical Christians who are saying that this citation of their Christianity in criticizing Israel and promoting anti-Semitic tropes is the greatest threat to evangelical Christianity and to their hold on American power today. So, there's a real sort of realigning within the party about how to talk about these things and who to platform and who to give voice to and how to combat voices on the other side. And by all accounts, and it's only trending in this way moving forward, this is going to be, if not the defining issue of the oncoming Republican Civil War, it's definitely going to be on the top tier of issues that define it.
Just as an external commentator, I'm not our American reporter, but as an Israeli who follows the politics and follows Ben's coverage, what's so scary for me, or what's so interesting, is how this kind of this almost rapid decline of this unshakable bond is actually built on the same people that for years, I would say, progressive voices have warned Israel of getting in bed with, in a sense. You know what I mean? This quote unquote, going back to the Tea Party, right? This almost philo-Semitism, right? We love Israel so much, that you also see in other parts of Bibi's kind of, international kind of, you see it in Hungary and different kind of stuff. You see that it's not actually a good infrastructure for building, your strategic relations as a country. And I think what's so sad is Israel actually did invest a lot in Hasbara, in trying, or at least in trying to align itself with the Republican Party. And there's something very tragic about seeing it fall apart so quickly, specifically after October 7th, where in theory, after investing in this stuff so much, you think we'd actually be better off, right? We wouldn't see a massive wave of anti-Semitism. So maybe that's a given. Maybe it's just the result of this kind of generational divide that Ben spoke about. But I think it's something wider. It's a very flimsy base for a partnership.
Confronting anti-Semitism is something that, despite all other political differences, Israeli leaders and diaspora Jews have always shared common ground. But even fighting Jew hatred became complicated in 2025. When Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chikli organized an international conference on combating anti-Semitism in Jerusalem, he invited far-right populist European politicians with xenophobic anti-immigrant ideologies. When that happened, European and North American Jewish leaders did not respond well. Haaretz editor-in-chief Esther Solomon came to the podcast to explain how the fiasco of a conference played out.
It was very, very important for the government to invite what is basically the whole spectrum of the far right in Europe to a conference in Jerusalem in the middle of a war, which is now 16 months in length, while there are still 59 hostages in Gaza, while we've just gone over 50,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza as well. But it's obviously a sign of the importance that the government puts to its really surging alliances with the far right in Europe, that this is such an important guest list for us. So why is it so shocking? Well, I think that it doesn't take much to understand why they would be shocked that Israel, a state founded as a sanctuary for the Jewish people after the Holocaust, would be inviting representatives of far-right parties, many of whom have neo-Nazi roots, or certainly neo-Nazi activists, certainly far-right and very, very illiberal populist ideologies, to a conference that is supposed to be about protecting the Jews of the world, particularly Europe and the States. But it's really about that Israel wants to own the idea of what anti-Semitism means these days, that it wants to make a complete equation between any kind of dissent to the Israeli government any kind of what it then terms as anti-Israel activity and antisemitism. And it's really not that interested in what combating antisemitism generally is understood to mean, which is protecting Jews from anti-Semites.
So this is an overall policy shift that we've seen play out over the Netanyahu years, right? This is not something unique to Amichai Chikli, who has been especially friendly to these far-right entities over his term as Diaspora Affairs and Anti-Semitism Minister.
Right. The Netanyahu governments, in their various incarnations, have made a point of developing contacts with parties that were always traditionally understood in the Israeli consensus as being taboo, being parties that Israel simply would not have contact with because of their incredibly unsavory roots and their ideologies. So at least for a decade, Netanyahu's Likud party has developed a series of quite deep relationships with various far-right parties across Europe. And, this conference was supposed to be a kind of coming out party for those relationships.
It's kind of backfired, though, right? Since the revelation of the guest list, there's been a big backlash with other participants saying, no, thank you, we don't want to go to a conference and sit beside these people and hear them speak. Who are the people who have backed out?
So it has actually turned into somewhat of an embarrassment. Some would call it a fiasco, because most of the most mainstream and extraordinarily pro-Israel Jewish community leaders from across the world have one by one cancelled their participation, including the UK's chief rabbi, including the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, including the head of the German government's agency for combating anti-Semitism. Pretty much all of the mainstream Jewish leaders have now pulled out because, for them, this is not just a question of having some kind of political bonanza on stage in Jerusalem that's good for the Israeli government. This is actually, in some ways, a matter of their own community's safety. It could almost be a matter of life and death for members of their community.
How has everything that has happened since October 7th, especially the atmosphere on college campuses over the course of the Gaza war, affected the outlook and identity of young Jews? In a special project this year, Haaretz correspondent Judy Maltz spoke to a wide range of students from around the world who were on campus during the war, bringing their diverse voices to the podcast. Here is part of an interview she conducted with Columbia University graduate Jacob Schmeltz, talking about his experiences, and following that, Judy's commentary on Jacob and on the other students she spoke to.
At Columbia, there were already demonstrations breaking out on campus less than 5 days after October 7th, and I felt very strongly that the Jewish community at Columbia was not given the opportunity to grieve the loss of our friends and family members and all of those affected, and we were not given the deference to discuss and really process our emotions on such a large and really distressing event. I mean, clearly when there are calls for violence and very strong rhetoric on campus before any military operation in Gaza had begun, I think that really showed what life would be like for many Jewish students in Columbia and for the rest of the year, unfortunately.
So, Judy, how did the encampment battle, police all over campus affect Jacob?
Jacob was an active member of Democrats at Columbia before October 7th. He was very political. He calls himself a liberal Zionist. He says, I have not changed at all. Everybody else has changed. I've stayed where I always was. I believe in the need for a Jewish state. I also believe there needs to be a two-state solution if that Jewish state is going to survive, he says. And I still believe that, even today. What happened with Jacob, which is really interesting, is that was so impacted by what happened in the campus there that he's decided to go in a completely different career direction. He was originally planning to go to law school and go into some career where he said that involves the intersection of law and politics.
He's had enough of politics.
Now he is actually thinking about doing graduate work in Jewish history. He is fascinated. The thing he went through on the campus in the history of anti-Semitism in America.
Really interesting. Really interesting. I wonder what his parents think.
He's teaching in a public school in Newark, New Jersey as part of the Teach for America. So you can see he's a very idealistic kind of kid.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Judy, what surprised you about the responses you heard, and what didn't surprise you? What did you expect?
So what surprised me was, in a number of cases, I have more than one person from a country talking about their experiences. For example, Australia, I had two, and South Africa I had. And even though these were Jewish students who had been on campus on October 7th, in the exact same country, the experience was completely different. They were not on the same campus, I should say that. But still, it's the same country. So in Australia, we have one guy who was at the University of Sydney who had such a horrific experience that he's making Aliyah at the end of the year. He's leaving Australia. He says, Australia is no longer my home. We have another guy who's in the University of Monash in Melbourne I don't understand why everyone thinks that there's so much anti-Semitism in Australia. Everyone I talk to from Israel is like, how are you guys doing? And he's like, there's not really anti-Semitism here. I've never encountered it. Neither has anybody I know. So, go figure. Two people from the same country. Same thing with South Africa. I told you about Ruby and what she experienced as a Jewish student leader. I had another young woman who's a graduate of WITS in Johannesburg. She said, no bad experience whatsoever. She stood in the streets with her Israeli flag demonstrating with hostage families. Nothing, just thumbs up from people. Same country, so that surprised me.
And with that, we conclude our trip around the Jewish world in 2025. And we bid farewell with hopes for a better, quieter, and more peaceful 2026. I'd like to thank my producer and editor, Adi Shacham, and Abby Seitz for her research assistance and support on the year-end episodes, and to the whole Haaretz Podcast team for their work on the segments that were included in it. In the new year, don't forget to follow and keep listening to the Haaretz Podcast, and if you want to support what we do here, ring in the new year with the resolution to subscribe to Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.